Matthew 25, verse 14. And this parable is another one of the parables given in Matthew 25. It's a parable of the talents. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not sure how far we're going to get today, so we're just going to jump in and see. But according to what I got prepared here, it might not be too far. Because something came to my attention when I was preparing this. And I'll share this with y'all later when I go through what I have prepared. But let's go ahead and read the parable just anyway, okay? We'll take it from the top, Matthew 25:14, and we'll read the parable. For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, who called his own servants together and delivered his goods to them. And he gave the one 5 talents. Now remember, he's not just giving them gifts and presents, all right? But what he's doing, he's having them manage his affairs. And he gave to one 5 talents, another he gave 2, and another he gave 1. There's a parallel account in Luke 19, by the way. We may or may not jump over there depending upon time. He gave one each according to his own ability. So remember, what was given to the servants was according to their ability to manage his affairs while he was gone. And he went on a journey. Then he who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and made another 5. But he who had received them went. I jumped over verse 17. And likewise, he who had received 2 gained 2 more also. But he who had received just 1 went and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. Now, after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. So he's calling them together to deal with them according to settle his affairs with them. And the one who had received 5 talents came and brought 5 others, saying, Master, you delivered unto me 5 talents. Look, I've gained you 5 more besides them. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things, and I will make you a ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your master. He who had received 2 talents came and said, Master, you delivered me 2 talents, and look, I've gained 2 more besides them. And his master said to them, Well done, faithful servant, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. Therefore, I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your master. I'm happy for you. Good. Then he who had received the 1 talent came and said, Master, I knew you were a hard man, and you sow where you haven't sown, and you gather where you haven't gathered any seeds. And I was afraid. I got scared, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. And here's what's yours. Here's what you gave me.
Didn't know anything about depreciation, I guess.
I reckon not, Bob. Or compound interest. Then his master told him, said, Well, you tried. You did the best you could. Come on in, right? No, wait, I need my glasses clean. No, it doesn't. It says something quite to the contrary. He says, Behold, his master said to him, You wicked and you lazy servant, you sloth, you wicked and lazy servant. You knew that I reap where I had not sown, and you gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received it back my own with interest. At least he would have got interest on his money had he deposited with the bankers. Therefore, take the talent from him. Take it away from him. and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, for he will have abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. You're fired. Scram. Beat it. As a nasty guy often called the orange man will say, you're fired. I remember some celebrity millionaire a few years ago had his own TV show. Remember that? Called The Apprentice? And he gave him so much money to do a certain task, and he also had certain celebrities there with him. And along the way, they got fired. I remember once upon a time, one guy that won was a bull rider of all people. Imagine that. Cattleman. In any case, let's go back. Let's go back to the top. Now, first things first. Does anyone have any question or comment over anything we've read? Because I do have some stuff prepared. First time, then Q.
In Matthew, a little background real quick. In Matthew 10, and in verse 42, it says, whoever shall give to drink unto one of these little ones a cup of cold water in my name, in the name of a disciple, truly I say to you, he shall be, and no likewise lose his reward. Well, years ago I saw something rather odd in a way. Proverbs 25:25 says, "As cold waters to a thirsty soul, so is good." Now here's the operative: the good news. Can you say gospel? Good news from where? A far country. So when you go over here to Matthew, where the Messiah is saying that because they thought the kingdom of Elohim would immediately appear to the disciples, the Talmudims, he gives them a parable about a man, that's actually Messiah, who goes into, here it is, a far country.
We're going to talk about I got some stuff prepared about this far country and the mission, the reason why he went as well.
And returns with a reward. And I saw there's a direct link, amazingly, it would seem, in my opinion, what it's worth, with Proverbs 25:25 and what is prophetically speaking towards what we're reading here in this account in Matthew.
And we'll talk more about that later. First Q, then Larry. Q?
Yes, my question, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can.
My questions are gonna be kinda, I guess you could say basic, but my first question would be like, since we're on the parable of the talents, what is like all that the talents represent in our daily life?
Fruits of the Spirit.
I think talent is a measurement of weight, right?
Well, yes,
Talent is a measurement
you're
of
correct, Raquel. A talent is a measure of weight. And in certain cases, depending upon how rich a man might be, a talent could mean a certain measurement of gold or silver or any other tradable commodity.
Right.
Well, what is it that we are given in today's day and age? Like, what are, as believers, as followers, what is it that we are given that we are to multiply?
The gifts of the Spirit.
Gifts of the Spirit. Well, we're given measures of the Holy Spirit. That's given in measures sometimes.
Our search for obedience and truth.
And we're given knowledge, wisdom. We don't just learn, for instance, in knowledge. Someone mentioned out there, I don't catch who it was, said the gifts of the Spirit. Let's take knowledge, for example. We take knowledge and we build on it. We learn things. We learn things that we didn't know and understand previously. We don't just take the first bit of knowledge that we learned at first and quit there. Because I get no pleasure out of saying this, but I think we've all known lots of people, especially those of us who've been with us a long time. Individually and collectively, by the way, the whole church has been like it. It's like they took Their first knowledge, the Sabbath instead of Sunday, the high days instead of the traditional days like Easter and Sunday and Christmas and all the other days, clean and unclean meats. The simple, just basic, most basic things, and they never graduated from that. And I feel so sad about that. Because what wonderful knowledge and mysteries lie awaiting us in this book. And I don't claim I know all the answers. I know I don't. I don't even know what all the questions are yet.
Good word. There you go.
I mean, I consider how far I've come. I don't mean that to mean to brag. But compared to where I was when I first started, when Bob first met me, I like to think I've come a ways. But then again, I look far ahead, how far I still got to go. I can't see beyond that. That's a horizon I still can't see yet. Like I just said, I don't even know what all the questions are. Okay, Larry, you had your hand up?
Yeah, and hope I'm not jumping ahead of what you're wanting to go, but it goes based upon Proverbs 25:25 that Tom brought up. But it's the parallel account in Luke, the 19th chapter. And there's additional information that's provided, okay? Because in verse 12 of chapter 19, it says, "Then he said, a certain well-born man went to a distant country to receive a kingdom for himself."
And then, yes.
There you
And that's
go.
where we're going to spend the bulk of this study, actually.
Okay. And verse 14, it says, "But the citizens of his city hated him
Hated him.
and sent ambassadors after him, and they were saying, 'We do not want this man to rule over us.'" Then in verse 26, it says, "For I say to you, and this is after the accounting of the minas and the talents and things like this, it says, 'For I say to you, to everyone who has it, it will be given, and from the one who does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. But to those my enemies who did not desire that I rule over them, bring them and execute them before me.'" So there's we go from these slaves who are given talents, but we also now understand that this well-born man was going away to receive a kingdom, but the people didn't want him to rule over them because it deals with rulership, okay? And when he comes back, okay, he basically has an accounting with his faithful slaves and the one that wasn't faithful, and he's having accounting here, and basically, it sums it up here. The enemies did not want him to be a ruler over them.
Right.
And so this is very parallel with the life of Joshua, because people didn't want him to rule over them. And he went away at his death, but he's coming back, and there's going to be an accounting.
Indeed.
Curtis?
You mean like when the crowd shouted, "Take him away, we want Barabbas"?
Let his blood be upon us and our children.
Raquel?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to his question, Q's question. So talents as like spiritual gifts. If I go to Romans 12:6, having then gifts different according to the grace that is given to us, let us use them. If prophecy, let us prophesy in proportion to our faith, or ministry, and let us use it in our ministering. He who teaches in teaching, he who exhorts in exhortation, he who gives with liberality, he who leads with diligence, he who knows mercy with gentleness. So it's spiritual gifts, the talent.
Okay, David?
Yeah, and just to add to that, when you're given a talent or if you're given a gift, you don't take that and put it under a bushel, you don't put it under your bed, you don't just sit there idly and don't do anything with it.
Mm-hmm.
You're supposed to increase it and manifest it over in front of people so that they can see that light and get drawn to it. And so Yeshua was trying to talk in parables that they could understand, and then hopefully educate them of this is what it means. If you're given one of the gifts of the Spirit, you should use that to the best and increase it so that everybody knows what Yahweh and Yeshua have given you.
Because when you're given a gift of the Spirit, regardless of which one, maybe your greatest gift, and that's up to the Father. To remember, he's in it to their own ability. The father decides it. You don't just take it and cuddle it and adore it and look at, just marvel at it and how wonderful it is. No, it's something that we can use. First Tom, then Larry.
Really fast, I don't mean to interrupt, Raquel, what was that, Romans what?
12:6. 12:6, sir.
Appreciate it.
Tom?
There was a discussion a little bit earlier about the nature of weight in terms of what's considered a talent or weight of something.
It was generally a year's supply of something in that time and era.
And it transcends into the spiritual dimension that Joshua talks about when he's admonishing, exhorting those that should have known better. Matthew 23:23 says, "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, who are down under the mask." It's hypocrites, it's down under the mask. It's not what they really are about, what they appear publicly to portray themselves as. For you pay tithe and mint and anise and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the Torah. You neglected that, which are what? Their judgment, mercy, and faith. Those are spiritual talents that we all can avail ourselves of if we're guided by the set-apart Spirit. But these people that profess to have it, they did not.
Mm-hmm.
And so he goes on to say, these you ought to have done and not leave the other undone. He's saying that you should have been taking care of these fiscal FISC responsibilities, but there's something far weightier in the eyes of the Creator, which are judgment, mercy, and faith. You're straying at a gnat is conveying and you're swallowing a camel. It's an absurdity, but it really gets the point across of you're majoring on the minors and not majoring on the major things that are important in the eyes of Yahweh.
Q?
So, just to recap on what was being said, I wrote down all the responses everybody's given me. So talents, some of the representations of talents would be a measure of weight, knowledge and wisdom, and fruits of the Spirit and spiritual gifts. Right? Am I kind of off here?
Okay.
So I actually just looked up the word wisdom because I was watching this yesterday, and I kind of had a controversy with this one, but obviously I'm wrong. The word wisdom, I looked up in the Strong's Hebrew Concordance, and it comes out to number 2451, and the translation is skillful or skill. So I'm guessing that also that knowledge and wisdom would also be translated to knowledge and skill. Would that be incorrect?
Depends on the context in which you're applying
Yeah.
the word. So for the context of Scripture, to be knowledgeable about Scripture gives you the wisdom to discern what is truth and what is a lie.
Right.
So if you're skillful in discerning evil from good, then yes, that's correct. It is a skill. But
Okay.
wisdom is also having the ability to have, I guess, a greater understanding of the knowledge that you've been given, so that you apply it in your life appropriately. So that's kind of a skill, but applying your knowledge is appropriately would be my definition of wisdom.
Okay. Raquel, then Larry.
Yeah, so there's just a couple things that I wanted to point out. First of all, when I look at this is all about stewardship, right? Because when you go to verse 27, he said, you ought to have deposited my money, right?
It was his.
These talents are his, right?
It wasn't their money to do with as they pleased.
Right, so it's stewardship, right? It's not ours, it's his. That's why he expects us to produce fruit, right? And I like how this parable came right after the parable of the wise and foolish virgins, because I believe it's what, while we're waiting for him, this is what we're supposed to do, right? Use the gifts and talents that he's given us to produce fruit. So that was it.
Okay, Larry?
I think the entire answer that Q is looking for could be found in Romans, the 12th chapter. And I'm going to read in part some of it because it very well outlines. It says, "Therefore, brethren, I call on you through the compassions of Elohim to present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, pleasing to Elohim, which is your reasonable service. And do not, and be not conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, in order to prove by you what is good and pleasing and perfect will of Elohim. For through the grace which is given to me, I say to everyone being among you, not to have high thoughts beyond what is right to think, but set your minds to be the right-minded, even Elohim divided a measure of faith to each. For even as we have many members in one body, but all members do not have the same function. So we, the many, are one body in Messiah, and each one members of another. But having different gifts according to the grace given to us, whether prophecy, according to proportion of faith, or the gift of administration in their ministry, or the one teaching in their ministry, or the one consoling in their encouragement, the one giving and with sincerity, and the one that rules with diligence, and the one showing mercy with cheerfulness." Now, if you go ahead and read verses 9 through 21, and I'm not going to read all this, it actually breaks down what you should and should not be doing. In conclusion, Paul here says in verse 20, "Then if your enemy hungers, feed him. If he thirsts, give him drink. For doing this, you will heap coals on the fire of his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome the evil with good." Isn't he actually mimicking the exact words that Yeshua told his disciples? Yeah, because when you read this chapter, just the 12th chapter of Romans, it outlines what the different gifts are. There are people in our congregation who are very gifted on administration. They work very well in helping the congregation run. There's other people that are gifted by helping others. There are people here that are gifted by having consoling words. So there's a lot of talent, so to speak, right here within the congregation. And it's really that spiritual gift that Elohim gives us, and what do we do with it? That's the question.
Okay. I'd like to get, well, we still got some time. I'd like to touch on some of the stuff I got prepared here, actually.
Hint, hint.
Hint, hint, yes.
Well, you asked.
Okay. To a far country. Back up to verse 14. Like a man or a nobleman prepare to a far country. So where was this far country which Joshua was going? Because in the parable it really doesn't say, but there is quite a bit in Scripture about where this far country may have been. Anyone? Where was Joshua going? I'll give you a hint. He's in one scripture we're going to read in Passover. It's going to read, "Where I go, you can't come." Any guesses? Anybody? David.
If we think about his total journey, he came from the Father to earth to be with the creation. He subjected himself to the creation and died
Yes.
and went to the grave. And then the Father rose, allowed him to rise the third day, and then he went back to the Father. So that's his journey. And I would call those three places a far country.
Okay. So basically, essentially he was going back to heaven to see his Father, right? We find
Wherever that is.
Wherever that is.
wherever that is. I'm not. Can I have a fan on, please? It's hot up here. Thank you, Raquel. Thank you. Far country. I got some references. For the sake of time, I think I'll just read them to you. It's found in John 8, verses 21 through 27. Some of these we're going to read during Passover. Got John 13, verses 33 and 36. John 14, verses 2 and 28. John 16, 5. John 17, 11. And Acts 1, verses 9 through 11. But in one of these verses, it says something very interesting. Where I go, you can't come. He says in a couple places, where I go, you can't come. So, 'cause in some of these passages, it says, now I go to prepare a place for you. I go to prepare a mansion for you. I go to prepare a place for you. But yet he says at the same time they can't come. Isn't that a little bit of a conundrum? So he doesn't mean man not going to heaven. Let's back up to the beginning, please. Let's try Deuteronomy 30, Deuteronomy 30, verse 12. Keep your place in Matthew 25. Verse 12. Verse 11, for this commandment which I command you today is not too mysterious for you, nor is it far off. So even back in when Moses was preaching to the Israelites before they entered Canaan, on the eve of entering the land, he said, this is not complicated, folks. He said, this is easy. Is it not in heaven? Which you should say, well, who will descend it for us and bring it down to us that we may hear it and do it? No, we don't have to rise all the way up to heaven for it. Let's try one of my favorites. Bob, guess which one I'm going to go to next? One of my very favorites. One of my very favorite Proverbs. Bob knows where I'm going.
I know where you're going to.
Oh, so does Tom. So does most, so does most, imagine that. You mean that one had me bouncing off the wall about 20 years ago when I first discovered it?
Yes, Kurt.
Proverbs 30, verse 4. Bob, you know me too well.
Yep.
So I remember the day during the study, we were studying the names at the time. And,
Well, that has been 25 years ago.
25. Okay, I'm sorry, not 20, 25.
Well, could be.
And I come into service one day, and I was going, Bob, Dennis, Larry, let me show you this interesting proverb I found. What do y'all make of this? No, it was more like, Bob, Dennis, Larry, hey, Dennis, yeah. I was so excited I couldn't even speak in English. All I could do was just, get excited and point. You remember that, Bob.
I remember it.
When I say it, I presented it to them in the thunder. In a calm, stately manner, that's a little tongue-in-cheek joke. But Bob seems to remember me bouncing off the wall. Anyway, Proverbs 30, verse 4. Who has ascended into heaven, or descended? Who has gathered the wind in his fist? And who has bound the waters in his garment? And who has established all the ends of the earth? And what is his name, and what is his son's name? Tell me if you even know. Let us try. Again. John 3:13. Let's go back up to John 3. Now, I don't claim to have them all, but I've got a few. John 3:13. No one has ascended to heaven but he who came down from heaven. That is the Son of Man who is in heaven. Boy, that's directing to the point, isn't it?
That ought to take care of all these funerals that we have out here.
Yeah.
I mean, in interpretation of the previous verses that says, oh, well, we're all going to go to heaven.
Oops.
Oopsie. Yeah, Bob, I share your thought. Oopsie. I mean, how forward to the point can you get? Let's try. Ephesians 4, verses 7 through 10. Ephesians 4, 7 through 10. But to each one of us grace was given according to the measure of Messiah's gift. Therefore, he says, when he descended on high, he led captivity captive, and he gave gifts to men. Now he ascended. What does it mean that he also descended to the lower parts of the earth, just like David brought up a while ago? He is descended also the one who ascended far above all the heavens, that he might fulfill all things. So what can we gather from this? The only one that's ever gone up and down, back and forth, is those who came down in the first place. And I jumped over one. I'm sorry, I jumped right over one. Let's try Acts 2. Let us back up to Acts 2. This is Peter's sermon. Acts 2. Let's start with verse 29. Peter's sermon to the crowds on Pentecost. Men and brethren, let me speak freely to you of the patriarch David, that he is both dead and buried, in his tomb is with us today, and his tomb is with us as is to this day. So when this didn't happen overnight, when between the time Joshua was crucified and died, went up to heaven to be with the Father, like it's pointed out earlier in Acts 1, David's still dead and buried, and he's still in his tomb. He's not up in the heavens. Peter made this plain that he's still buried within his tomb to this day. So he didn't rise and waft off to heaven. He's still dead and buried. He's still awaiting his resurrection, isn't he? Now, let's jump over to verse 34, shall we, please? Fast. Verse 34, for David did not ascend into heavens, but he says himself, said Yahweh to my Yahweh, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. So verse 34, I mean, how plain point to get? It says David did not ascend to the heavens. When I read verses like this, it reminds me of one of my favorite studies that David ever gave. Do you believe? Let's try Romans 10:6, please. Romans 10:6. But the righteousness of faith that speaks in this way, do not say in your heart, who will ascend into heaven? That is to bring Messiah down from. We're talking. Don't go thinking that. Don't go saying that. But yet, what do we hear so many times in Sunday churches and this time of year? We hear about Jesus going off into heaven and taking all these other wonderful saints and people and their grandma and their doggies and their favorite kitty cats all up into heaven with them. Right? Yes, David.
I thought all dogs go to heaven.
All good dogs go to heaven.
All good dogs go to heaven.
So operative.
This has got to stop.
David, I did not even think of that. Let's try John 6:52. I jumped over one again. Actually, I'll go ahead and read 50 through 52. How's that? This is the bread which comes down from heaven, that he may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. And if anyone eats this bread, he will live forever. And the bread that I shall give is my flesh, and I will give for the life of the world. And the Jews therefore quarreled amongst them, well, how's this man going to give us his flesh to eat? And I'm sure there are others. I know there are others, and I'm reasonably certain why. I'm reasonably certain I missed a few. But thank you. So at least we know he went up into heaven, and he didn't take a host of all good, sweet people, everyone's favorite grandma and favorite Auntie Sue, and all them into heaven with him. That didn't happen. They're still waiting for their resurrection. Nonetheless, now that we know where he went, but what was the purpose and why did he go? We've already touched on this. Are we even told? We were told.
Went back to his original estate.
He went back to his original state. That's in John's. Yes. Yes. Well, since I'm still here in John. Let's just flip over to John 17. Bob. And that is in John 17:5. John 17:5. This is prayer before his crucifixion. It's prayer in the garden. Joshua's final prayer. Now, O Father, glorify me together with you, with yourself, with the glory that I had with you before the world even was. He was going back to his original state. And yet there are a lot of people that do not believe in a pre-incarnate Yahshua. They believe he did not exist until he was born. And there are whole churches that teach that, but yet here it is playing again. It's like David's just my favorite study. I keep coming across verses that remind me of that. Because he started out with some of the most fantastic claims the Bible makes, and then worked his way down to some most simple ones, and it's the simple ones that people can't accept. Well, I don't know about that. But you believe it or you don't. Yes, Larry.
Yeah, and here's something that I really appreciate, and I'm not trying to change the subject here, but with him saying that, glorify me with yourself, with the glory that I had with you before the existence of the world, the very next verse, he says, I revealed your name to the men whom you gave to me out of the world. They were yours, and you gave them to me, and they have kept your word. There are the vast majority of so-called Christian religions today will argue the fact, well, we have no scriptures that Jesus said Yahweh's name. Okay? Well, this right here
Got
shows
straight
that-
to the point. Says, yes, he
straight to the
did.
point. Yahshua was telling in this prayer that he had given his Father's name to these men who the Father who had determined would be the foundlings of the faith.
Okay.
So, that's very pointed right here. And that's not even to go into all the scriptures that were quoted out of the Hebrew text that had Yahweh's name in it, the divine tetragrammaton. There's no doubt that when they quoted those scriptures, they said the divine name.
Oh, undoubtedly. And that's what got Yahshua in trouble during his trial. I says, there's a school of thought, and seems to be growing, that when he was on trial before the scribes and Pharisees, when he gave his testimony, that he actually, what he actually said, spoken word, he said spoke of the power, but there are some who believe what he actually said was the name itself, and because that was the rule for blasphemy. And that's what got the high priest all mad and why he tore his garment. He said the names. What more testimony do we need? We've all heard his blasphemy, and that was the definition of blasphemy, using that dreaded four-letter word. Yes, Bob.
Well, what the honor is the fact that there are a few on this planet that he's actually manifested his name to, right here in this room. What a privilege. What a privilege it is to have, to be one that has had his name manifested, and you know it, and you cherish it, and you obey that name. I mean, there's so many things that can be said about it, because there is there's a desert out there of understanding. I mean, I mean, there's so much confusion when it comes to religion. It's really ridiculous.
Indeed.
Okay. Now, with Passover coming up, yeah, we know when we stick to a text, particularly the parallel account in Luke, where it talks about he went up to see about rulership. However, this ties in well, because with Passover coming up, and particularly when we delve into during the service, when we talk about going through the foot washing portion of the service, wink, wink, I wanted to focus on something else he did while he was on his trip, while he was away. Raquel, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I just wanna quote 2 verses. So, not only, I mean, Yeshua is that stairway, right, to heaven. So, like Jacob's vision, Jacob's ladder, let me just read that, 28:12. When he dreamed, and behold, a ladder was set up on the earth, and its top reached to heaven, and there the angels of Elohim were ascending and descending on it.
Mhm.
Right? And if you go to John 1:61, when Yeshua was talking to Nathanael, he said, most assuredly I say to you, hereafter you shall see heaven open, and the angels of Elohim ascending and descending upon the Son of Man.
So this proverbial ladder would seem to be for the angels and not us, wouldn't it?
At that time, but after Passover, he is the vehicle to get to that.
Yeah. Anyway, because he did something else. And I wanted to touch on this with Passover coming up. What else did Joshua do? Yeah, he received his kingdom. But how many of us realize or forgotten or maybe need to be reminded, how about he's also successfully completed his course to be fully admitted into the priesthood of Melchizedek? I want to take, because here's where I deliberately planned it this way. I'm not rejecting or saying it was not about rulership, but there's something else I feel every bit as important. Because after all, we're reminded about the royal priesthood. It can be kings and priests. Now I suppose next time if somebody wants to pick it up a little bit up on the rulership portion, that's great. That's fine with good. I'm happy. I'm waiting at the bit to hear it. But in any case, let's back up to Psalm 110, please. Shall we? It's a very brief psalm. We're going to read all of it. Because I'd like to spend what time we have left discussing anything pertinent to him being the chief of the Melchizedek priesthood. I think because Passover coming, I really wanted to take a little bit different spin on this. Talk about something we wouldn't normally discuss in a study such as this. Psalm 110, we're going to read all of it. It's only 7 verses. Psalm 110, verse 1. Then Yahweh said to my Yahweh, this is very interesting here, but anyway, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. And Yahweh sends the rod of your strings out of Zion. Rule in the midst of your enemies. Sounds like kingship, but let's keep going here. Rule in the midst of your enemies. But let's read here. Let's keep going. Your people shall be volunteers in the day of your power. In the beauties of holiness from the womb of the morning, you have the dew of your youth. And Yahweh has sworn, and he will not relent. You are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. Because Yahweh is at your right hand, and he shall execute the kings in the day of his wrath. He shall judge amongst the nations. And he will fill the place with dead bodies, and he shall execute the heads of many countries, and he shall drink of the brook by the wayside. Therefore, he shall uplift the head. I think it's very important here. Because who is going to come in and leading this great cavalry charge I discussed last time? Well, man, because he execute kings in the day of his wrath, and he will judge amongst the nations. Well, anciently, who was to provide judge? Who provided judgment in ancient Israel? Didn't the priests do that, particularly in the Levitical cities? That was part of their job. They did not just offer sacrifices. It was the chief priest. Part of his job was to render judgment. Let's fast forward a little bit, because let's jump forward. Let's jump to Hebrews 8, please. I'm going to do a bit of reading here, but it ain't. Here we go. Hebrews 8. And it talks about the new priestly service. And this will tie in actually to this parable. But we just need to be patient, all right? But it will tie, every bit of this. We're going to review Hebrews 8, 9, and a little bit of 10. But if we'll just be patient, every bit of this is going to tie in. We'll see this as we go through. Hebrews 8, verse 1. Now, this is the main point of the things which we are saying. We have such a high priest who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heavens, a minister of the sanctuary with the true tabernacle which Yahweh erected, and not men. For every high priest is appointed to offer both gifts and sacrifices. Therefore, it is necessary for this one that he have something to offer. Joshua had something to offer, all right. He offered himself as a sacrifice, as the greatest sacrifice ever. For if he were on earth, but the high priest can't do that. The Levitical priest cannot do that. For if he were on earth, he would not be a priest, since there are priests who offer the gifts according to the law. You'll find that in Exodus 28, 29. You also find it in Leviticus as well. Who serve here, there's something important here. Key here. Let's pay attention here. Who serve the copy and shadow of the heavenly things. Who share a copy of the heavenly things, as Moses was divinely instructed when he was about to make the tabernacle. For he said, see that you make all things according to the pattern that I have shown you on the mountain. So all this intrinsically crafted material, all the censers, the lampstands, the mercy seat, everything that we saw on this, that Moses saw and constructed, was only a shadow of what was physically already there. He was following a pattern that already existed. Now, man can't go up into heaven and do their priesthood service on the real ones up in heaven. So, question: what would be the priesthood for which this was designed for? It's not Levi. Can we say Melchizedek, everybody? was Melchizedek. But now he has obtained a much more excellent ministry, as much as he is also the mediator of a better covenant, which was established on better promises. For if the first covenant had been faultless, there would have been no place sought for a second. Finding, behold, the days are coming when Yahweh, says Yahweh, when I will make a new covenant with them, with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, and not according to the covenant which I have made with their fathers on the day in which I took them out of the land of Egypt, took them by hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, because they did not continue in my covenant, therefore I disregarded them. Tom?
You read in verse 8, at the beginning of it, when it talks about that covenant, mainstream Christianity with their antinomian, anti-law, anti-commandment mentality actually says, you see, there was a fault. There was a fault with Torah. No, of course not. It says we're finding fault with the people, with them, not with the covenant, not with the Torah. The day is coming when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel, with the house of Yehudah, because he's going to be placing his divine nature, as Peter says, we're to be partakers thereof, into our minds and hearts. But I've heard over 50 some odd years in the faith, all these professing ministers of the gospel that are quote Christian, that say, you see, the fault was with the covenant. So we had to get a change in the law. So much for don't think I've come to destroy the law and the prophets, Matthew 5:17, but to fulfill it. Just blatantly twist, like a wicker basket, twisting wicked concepts that are utterly unscriptural, as all of us here, thankfully I'm inclined to believe, understand. But I think it's worthy to mention that he's saying that the fault was with failing flesh, human nature, carnally minded people. And now we have another covenant, and it says it's even got some better promises attendant with it.
Larry?
Just very similar to Tom's thought. If the fault was with Torah as it was given, then if it was a fault, then it was something that was broken that Yahweh would have given according to what religion teaches. And so what they're saying is it was at fault, it was something that Yahweh gave that he shouldn't really give because nobody could live up to it. So he's having to give a new law and dumb it down so you can live up to that.
Indeed.
And that's not
Indeed.
Oh, we're under grace now.
we're under grace.
Convoluted ideas under what it means to be under grace.
Yeah.
That's just blaming Yahweh for all their problems. That's all there is to it.
But what happened is you had the Torah, okay, that Joshua kept perfect, and when he expanded the new covenant, so to speak, what happened is he expanded it to be able to take spirit sons and daughters in.
Okay. Let's fast forward to the top of Hebrews 9, please. Then Hebrews 9, verse 1. Then indeed, even the first covenant had ordinances of divine service and of the earthly sanctuary. For a tabernacle was prepared in the first part, in which the lampstand, the table, and the showbread, which is called the sanctuary. And behind the second veil, part of it behind the tabernacle, which is called the holiest of all, or the holy of holies, which had the golden censer of the ark of the covenant overlaid with all sides of the gold, in which were the golden pot that had the hidden manna, and Aaron's rod that had budded, and the tablets of the covenant. Remember, we already read in chapter 8, what was being spoken of here, that Paul, or our writer, mystery writer in Hebrews is that these are copies of what Moses saw in heaven. These were the copies that Moses was shown. And above it were all the cherubim of glory and overshadowing the mercy seats. Of these things we cannot speak of in detail. Now when these things had been prepared, the priests always went into the first part of the tabernacle, performing their services. But into the second part, the high priest went alone once a year, not without blood, which he offered for himself and for the people's sins committed in ignorance. For the Holy Spirit indicating this, that the way into the holiest of all was not made yet manifest while the first tabernacle was still standing. It was symbolic for the present time in which both gifts and sacrifices are offered, which cannot make him who performs the sacrifices perfect in regard to their conscience, concerned only with foods and drinks and various washings and fleshly ordinances imposed until the time of the Reformation. It doesn't mean the Reformation happened in Europe in the 1600s. That's in the 1600s. That's not what was meant. We're going to read very shortly exactly what that means. But Messiah did come. But Messiah came as high priest of the good things to come, with the greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands and not of this creation. Well, if it was things perfect, not made of this creation, remember, this was what, imagine that. Not with the blood of bulls, of goats and calves, but with his own blood he entered the most holy place once and for all, having obtained the eternal redemption. For with the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of the heifer, sprinkling the unclean sanctifies for the purifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Messiah, who brought through the eternal Spirit, offered himself, and he offered himself without spot to Yahweh, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living Yahweh. And for this reason, he is the mediator of the new covenant, by means for under the redemption, how transgressions under the first covenant, that those who call may receive the promise of the eternal inheritance. Wherefore, there is a testament that must be also necessity the death of the testator. And the testament is enforced after men are dead, since it has no power while the testator lives. Therefore, not even the first covenant was dedicated without blood. For Moses had spoken every precept to the people according to the law, which took the blood of calves, goats, with water, scarlet wool, hyssop, sprinkled in scarlet wool, sprinkled the book itself and all the people, saying, "This is the blood of the covenant, which Yahweh has commanded you." Then likewise he sprinkled with blood all the tabernacle and all the vessels of the ministry. Remember, he's talking about what Joshua did. He didn't do this in the physical temple. But according to the law, most all things that are purified with blood, and without shedding of blood there is no remission. Therefore, it was necessary that the copies of the things, and here we go again, the copies of things in heaven should be purified with these, but the heavenly things themselves were better, with better sacrifices than these. We're talking about, well, how can you do with a better sacrifice? Remember, the physical ones on this earth were done with bulls and goats and calves, ashes of a red heifer, and all this other ritual. But it just says here, the ones that the heaven, the original ones, the true ones, were sanctified and purified with a better sacrifice, and that was by Yahshua himself. And how could he offer that sacrifice? As the chief, as the high priest of the order of Melchizedek, as a chief priest. So in a manner of speaking, while it doesn't say that specifically, priest of priests, nonetheless, such a title could apply, could it not? King of kings, master of masters, and priest of priests. Yes, Raquel.
Isn't Melchizedek a king too? His
Yes,
king
he
and
is.
priest. Okay.
He is also you're correct. He is a royal king.
I think his name's like what means king of righteousness.
That is right. It means king of righteousness. Imagine that. King righteousness. So there is power and rulership in that. Imagine that. From verse 24, so Messiah has not entered into the holy places made with hands, which are copies of the true. Here we go with that again. Because the ones on earth were just copies of the true ones. But into heaven itself, and now to appear in the presence of Yahweh for us. Not that he should offer himself often, as the high priest enters the holy place every year with the blood of another animal. He would then have to offer or suffer often since the foundation of the world, but now once at the end of ages. And he has appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. It is appointed for men to die but once, but after this their judgment. So Messiah offered once to bear the sins of many. To those who eagerly await for him, he will appear a second time apart from sin for salvation. Now I got just a few verses left in my notes from Hebrews 10. Let's go ahead and go with that. I think we got time. For the law, having a shadow of the good things to come, not the very image of these things, can never, with these same sacrifices, which they continue to offer year by year by year, make those who approach perfect. For then they would not have ceased to be offered. For the worshippers, once purified, would have no more consciousness of sins. But in those sacrifices there is a reminder of sins every year. For it is not possible that the blood of bulls and goats could take away their sins. Therefore, when he came into the world, sacrifice and burnt offering you did not desire, but a body you have prepared for me, and burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin you had no pleasure. Then I said, behold, I have come, and the volume of the book written of me, to do your will, O Elohim. Previously saying, sacrifice and offering, burnt offerings, and offerings for sin you did not desire, nor had you had pleasure in them, which are offered according to the law. And he said, behold, I have come to do your will, O Yahweh. He takes away the first, that he may establish the second. By that we will have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Yahshua Messiah once and for all. And every priest stands ministering daily, offering and repeating the same sacrifices which can never take away sins. But this man, after he had offered one sacrifice for sins, sat down at the right hand of Elohim. And from that time, waiting till his enemies are made his footstool. Here we come up again with that. Enemies made his footstool, just like we read Psalm 110, just like we read in the parable. For one by suffering he has perfected forever those who are being sanctified. But the Holy Spirit also witnesses to us, for after he has said this before, this is the covenant which I will make with them after those days, says Yahweh, and I will put my laws into their hearts, and on their minds I will write them. Then he adds, their sins and their lawless deeds will I remember no more. Now where there is a remission of these, there is no longer an offering for sin. The rest of the chapter from there goes on to discuss what it means to live in faith. Any question or comment? Yes, Tom.
Very powerful.
Well, you were quick on the draw on that. So you were quick on the draw on that, Tom.
Well, only because I've been thinking for some time about the conditions we are in this world and the coming of the Messiah as fulfillment of a Melchizedekian priesthood. But here we have in Daniel 7, the prophet Daniel saying, I saw in the night visions, and behold, one, this is talking about Joshua, like unto the Son of Man, came with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days. Can you say Yahweh Father, Abba Father?
Mm-hmm.
And they brought him near before him. Here's Joshua being brought before our Heavenly Father. And there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom that, I double out, all people, nations and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which will not be destroyed. And there's other things that you can go into in this chapter that talk about the dominion that he is going to have reigning over the nations. Because it says in verse 27, and the kingdom and dominion and the whole heaven, and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people. So it's being passed on to his servants. The people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. And Daniel said he was very troubled by this. It was so overwhelming, the revelation that he was received in verse 28. So it seems to me that so much of what is being prophesied here for the prophet Daniel's statement of the visions and the night he saw was the Father conveying unto the Messiah as the heir apparent now to the kingdom on this earth. And we're told we're supposed to pray that his kingdom would come and his will would be done in heaven as it's now being done on earth. No, 1,000 times no. That's what the Christian world is essentially saying. It's just like the scripture says, that we would pray that his authority and kingdom would come to planet earth as it's now being perfectly done in the third heaven. Anyway.
Okay. Because what's important about this Melchizedek is this: he was not a new figure, a new identity in the time which Hebrews was written. First, we read of it in Psalm 110. How about when Abraham met him? Let's try Genesis 14, please. We're going to read a few verses out of Genesis 14. We're going to pick it up in verse 18. We're not going to read all of it, but just a few verses here. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine, and he was the priest of Elohim the Most High. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High, of the Elohim Most High, or Yahweh El Shaddai, if you will, the possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be Yahweh El Shaddai, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. So, who's this Melchizedek? I mean, he's blessing Abraham here, and he gave him a tenth of all. So he gave this, Abram gave this tenth of all, or this tithe, to Melchizedek. Remember, this is Melchizedek speaking. This is not Abram speaking, saying, Blessed be Abraham, or Abram, no. No, this is Melchizedek speaking and laying a blessing upon Abram. He's receiving a priestly blessing. He said, well, I mean, how do we know he's receiving a priestly blessing? Because we read earlier in verse 18 that Melchizedek was the priest of Yahweh El Shaddai. And so who is this Elohim the Most High Melchizedek is speaking of? The Father. He was speaking of the Father. He wasn't speaking of himself. He was speaking of the Father. Now, in reference to a point Tom brought up earlier, it ties perfectly in with it's tying perfectly my conclusion here. Let's go to Revelation 1. Let's turn to Revelation 1. Let's pick it up in verse 4, please. John, to the seven churches which are in Asia, grace to you and peace to him from who is and who was and who is to come, and for whom the seven spirits are before his throne, and from Yahshua Messiah, the faithful witness, the firstborn of the dead, the ruler over the kings of the earth. And to him who loves us and washed us from our sins in his own blood, who has made us kings and priests, to his Elohim and his Father. So it agrees perfectly what we just read in Genesis, doesn't it? If we're made kings and priests to him, glory be him to his dominion. So if he's praise and glory to this priest, and whose dominion is this? Joshua's. It's under the rulership of Melchizedek, the royal priest, the royal king, the priestly king. Yep, Melchizedek the priest. Behold, he is coming with the clouds, and just like we read earlier about his return and coming back. And every eye will see him, and even they who pierced him, and all the tribes of the earth were mourned because of him. Remember how those who hated the king, it's particularly in the parallel account in Luke, they hated this guy. I am the Alpha and Omega, or I am the Alpha and the Tav. I am the beginning and the end, says Yahweh, who was, who is to come, the Almighty. And let's jump forward a little bit to verse 12, remaining in Revelation 1. Then I turned to see the voice that spoke with me. See, John's hearing this voice. I heard his voice that spoke with me, and having turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands. Who else could work in the midst of a lampstand? The priest? A priest, imagine that. And in the midst of the 7 golden lamps was one like the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the feet and girded down with a chest with a golden band. Who else wore such attire and raiment? Thank you, David, the high priest. I wish you'd spoken up a little bit, but you're correct. His head and his hair were white like wool, white as snow, and his eyes were like a flame of fire. So evidently, if his eyes were like a flame of fire, he's not too happy about something, is he? Could be speculated. His feet were like fine brass, which were refined in the furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. And he had in his right hand 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword, and his countenance like the sun, shining in its strength. When I saw him, I fell at his feet. He said to me. So, we're about out of time here, but Abraham and John both saw the same figure, Melchizedek. And I hope I did justice in tying all this together. Because like I said, my intention was to potentially go a little bit different route with Passover coming up and the importance of our foot washing service. We'll have David Gibson up next for the main message.